Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I value you all so much, and I'm so delighted that you tune in every evening to listen to a story, because there is nothing better in this world than a good story, and this is a very exciting one. We're on part 2 of our story tonight, and it's all about this girl who's in a very dark place. Her name is Babs. And in the beginning of the story, it starts out with her running for her life because she's being chased by a deranged lunatic. But it all begins when she's on this camping ground, all on her own, being chased by this man. But we're about to find out how she gets to this camping ground and what exactly leads to her being chased by this manic man. So let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight. Your uncle owns this Lakefield camping ground, does he? I mean, isn't he your father's brother? Because he has the same surname as you. That's right. You wouldn't know they were brothers. Chris Wilton. Well, he's a big strapping man. Built for the great outdoors, you could say. When he married his wife, they bought the camping ground together. Never looked back, you know, as it became the gift that keeps on giving. My father, on the other hand, is so different to his brother. He plays golf, loves reading, plays bridge, so they couldn't be more different. But I'll give Chris a call, and then he'll give us the code we need for the gate, in order for us to easily access the Lakefield campground, so that we'll be good to go. To tell you the truth, Babs, I think Uncle Chris will probably be delighted that we're using his facilities, so soon after the winter, that is. It would seem the 2.5-hour journey from Seattle to Mount Rainier had been absolutely beautiful, with the cheerful spring sunlight beaming through the windscreen window, while 80s music, which was Bab's absolute favourite, was being played energetically on the car stereo, so that both girls were bobbing happily in time to the music, and singing along with the likes of Madonna, Olivia Newton-John, and Boy George. Babs felt as if a heavy cloud had been lifted off her little shoulders, as she talked away happily to Veronica the whole trip, about everything and nothing, taking great care not to talk about her breakup with Russell. Babs decided that she'd give Russell time to realise what he was missing without her cheerful presence in his life. And on this camping trip, she didn't want to be focusing on him, otherwise she'd never get to enjoy herself, and she intended to make the very most of this extended weekend break. Veronica had been absolutely right. This break was exactly what Babs needed, and she was extremely delighted that she had agreed to come on it. I'm so glad I came, Veronica. Thanks for doing this for me. It means an awful lot, you know. You really are a generous friend. Well, I had to do something, didn't I? Said Veronica. I couldn't continue seeing you look so miserable, Babs. My Uncle Chris was very pleased that we're using his facilities, you know. He told me we're welcome to use the camping ground whenever we like. The good news is it's practically empty, because it usually is after winter, although I believe there is a couple that will be camping there this weekend, so we won't be totally alone. But the weather's been so perfect of late, hasn't it? It could almost be summer. But I dare say in early spring, some people are extremely reluctant to book the campground, because they're very worried about it getting too cold at night. I don't worry about that kind of thing. Uncle Chris keeps plenty of extra blankets on the site, so if people get cold, they know what to do. It's a pity there's another couple staying at the campground, said Babs, but I guess you can't have everything. I just hope, for our sakes, they keep themselves to themselves and don't bother us. The journey to the Lakefield campground in Mount Rainier had been efficiently quick. Veronica's bright red Jeep arrived at a very large black wrought iron gate, where she quickly keyed in the secret code that her Uncle Chris had given her. The large gate whooshed wide open, and the bright red Jeep rattled precariously down a thin, windy dirt road, fringed by tall, lofty evergreen trees. The road was scattered liberally with stones of all shapes and sizes, the smaller ones pinging against the car bonnet, and there were several dips in the road that caused the Jeep to bounce over the uneven terrain. We are here, Babs, said Veronica triumphantly. Welcome to the Lakefield campground. You'll understand shortly why it's called Lakefield Campground. We'll follow this road for quite a while, past a wild alpine field full of flowers, until we get to the lake, which you will see is surrounded by tall, lofty groves of trees. And in the immediate background, you'll observe the imposing silhouette of Mount Rainier herself, covered in snow and ice. It's the largest volcano outside of Alaska, you know. Is it? Asked Babs in surprise. I didn't even know it was a volcano. Well, I guess you learn something every day, don't you? Said Veronica. It's hard to believe Mount Rainier is so close to home. I mean, it didn't take us long to get here, did it? No, it didn't. You're right about that. It's almost at our front doorstep, Babs agreed. Well, I believe it's over 1,400,000 feet, said Veronica reflectively. People have died climbing Mount Rainier, you know. It's still an active volcano. You're going to love it here, let me tell you, Babs. I should have brought you here a long time ago. I guess you could say it's our family's best-kept secret. I remember getting lost here when I was only 3 years old. My parents thought I'd drowned at the lake, but they found me in the woods standing next to a large berry bush and stuffing myself with berries. My hands, my cheeks, and my entire dress were covered in berry juices, so much so that my mother thought I was soaked in blood, so she let out this ear-piercing scream that scared the bejesus out of my poor father. He assured her that it wasn't blood I was covered in, but berry juice. They were so relieved I was in one piece, so much so they didn't even reprimand me for wandering off like that. There's an abundance of indigenous wildlife here, and I'm quite sure we'll see the deer tonight coming to the lake to have a drink when the sun begins to set. There's nothing like the sunset over the horizon, in its kaleidoscope of golds and oranges. You're just going to love it. It sounds incredible, said Babs. I can't wait to see it all. I brought my binoculars with me, so I fully intend to watch all the wildlife coming to the lake. Finally, Babs's red jeep reached the all-expansive lake, and they parked it next to a couple of tall trees and began to set up their tent for the night. It was such a magnificently beautiful spring day, not too hot or too cold. The silvery lake shimmered in the mid-morning sun, while overhanging trees dipped their green, bushy toes into the water. There was an abundance of bird life roosting in the trees, chirping away, and Babs was delighted to see a mother duck and all her delightful little ducklings bobbing among the reeds. She counted over 12 ducklings to be exact. They were the cutest things she'd ever seen. There was a sizable wooden boathouse on the lake, where you could take out one of the rowing boats onto the water, and there was a large selection to choose from. The boathouse was remarkably well equipped, even with fishing gear and anything else besides that the Lakefield visitors might possibly need to use for their weekend breaks. There was also a large fishing pier, where you could indulge in a spot of fishing, along with a brick building that contained all the refrigeration and bathroom facilities you could possibly need. It would seem Veronica's uncle, Chris Wilton, had thought of absolutely everything and forgotten nothing. Babs was extremely glad to see there was no sign of the couple that was supposed to have booked the campground for the weekend, as no tent had been pitched around the lake, nor was there any sign of a car. So she began to secretly hope that she and Veronica might end up being alone for the entire weekend, and what could be better than that? The day that Veronica and Babs had spent together had been a magnificent one, and after rowing a boat across the lake and taking a casual stroll through the woods, Veronica had industriously got to work making a fire, and Babs was secretly very impressed. She could well believe her best friend had been coming here for years, as Veronica got that fire going like an absolute pro. Before long they were drinking piping hot tea together and eating pork sausages, potato and Greek salad. Babs had not eaten for a long time, but very suddenly her appetite was invigorated, and suddenly she felt so much better about her life and the future that stretched out before her like an unwritten white slate, with so much bountiful opportunity. As they were sitting on camping chairs, overlooking the lake, all of a sudden Veronica's cell phone rang. She glanced down briefly at the number, and was about to ignore the call, when the caller ID revealed it was her father phoning her. She put her cell phone on loudspeaker and whispered to Babs, "It's my dad." "Hi, Dad. This is a surprise. You never phone me. What's up?"
"Are you at Chris's camping ground?"
came her father's deep, husky voice.
"He told me you'd asked him if you could stay there with your friend."
"That's right, Dad. I'm here with Babs. We're having the most wonderful time together. The weather is absolutely perfect. There was supposed to be another couple camping here for the weekend, but they failed to show up, which I'm really pleased about. So we've got the entire place to ourselves, which is a real treat. Honestly, Dad, I don't know why people are so reluctant to camp here in early spring. I mean, it's the best time of the year to come here. So what if it gets cold at night? I mean, honestly, during the day, the weather is close to perfect. We even took a rowing boat out into the water earlier. Oh, and the bird life, Dad. It was magnificent. We saw some unusual birds, you know."
"Good, I'm glad to hear you're enjoying yourself, love. I just think you should know. Your mother had a nasty fall."
"Dad, you're scaring me. What do you mean a nasty fall?" said Veronica, sounding aghast. "How nasty exactly? What happened? Is she all right, Dad?"
"It's nothing to worry your pretty face about, love. So for goodness sake, don't you dare panic. Your mother's in hospital being evaluated. She hit her head hard and blacked out for a short while. She broke her wrist, sprained an ankle and bruised her upper lip, but I'm sure she'll be just fine enough. She's just in shock, though. I guess it could have been worse. So we have to be thankful, don't we, for small mercies."
"What the hell happened, Dad? How did Mum fall? It's not like her to be so ungainly. She's not inclined to be clumsy like that."
"Well, she wasn't clumsy exactly. No one could have anticipated your mother falling. It happened very quickly. Simon Gardner from next door happened to pop over at the rather inopportune time, you could say. He was coming over to give us some of his wife's homemade pickles. Deborah makes the most amazing pickles, as you well know. Anyway, you know what Colbert is like, good old Colbert. He began to bark excitedly, getting all frisky and, over-animated, you could say. He dashed to the front door like a great big guffoon. Sometimes that big goofy dog has no idea how huge he actually is. He's a cross between a St. Bernard and some other jumbo-sized breed. And, well, let's just say, if anyone was ungainly, it was Colbert. Your mother was going to answer the door. It all happened in a split second of time."
"What happened, Dad? What did Colbert do?"
"Well, you know Colbert, in his unbridled enthusiasm, which dare I say is larger than he is, which is really saying something. He charged right into your mother. Didn't mean to, of course, but he was just so desperate to get to the door. I think he could tell that it was Simon Gardner on the other side, because dogs have a very good sense of smell, you know. So, as Simon often takes Colbert for a walk, with his wire-haired terrier Tutu, I guess he thought he was going to have another walk, and that Simon was coming to collect him. So he got terribly excited, tail wagging furiously, legs all over the place. You only have to say the word walk to Colbert, and he becomes crazed, doesn't he? Anyway, your poor mother. She was telling Colbert to be quiet, but that dog refused to listen. Just pushed into her. She lost her footing and went crashing down on the white and black tiles in our entrance hall. She fell flat on her face, I'm afraid to say, her head hitting the side of the wrought iron desk. She blacked out for a brief while from hitting her head against it. For a moment I thought she was dead. I'm not kidding either. She didn't respond when I tried to wake her up. I'm telling you, Veronica, I've never felt so affrighted in all my life," said Mr. Wilton, his voice suddenly sounding rather flustered, as if remembering it all brought it all back. "I thought your mother was a goner for a moment, Veronica. It made me realize that I would be a very lonely man without her. That woman is the light of my life. But never mind that, she's going to be fine. And that's all that matters, isn't it?
Oh, Dad! Oh, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. You poor thing, you must have had quite the shock. I can't imagine what you went through, Dad, witnessing all that. And poor Mr. Gardner, I can't help feeling sorry for him, because he must have felt dreadful for coming around in the first place. Honestly, Dad, Colbert is the absolute end. But he's such a lovely dog at the same time. You can't be mad at him, can you? Is Mum going to be all right? What do the doctors have to say?
Well, the doctors are evaluating her, but they don't seem desperately concerned, which is good news. Your mother is in a dithery state. Never seen anything like it, actually. She's very confused and rather bewildered, you could say. She keeps asking after you. I've told her a plethora of times that you're camping at Chris's camping ground. But your mother's memory is extremely vague. No sooner do I tell her that you've gone camping, she nods her head, and then a few minutes later she asks after you again. The doctor reckons she's suffering from a mild concussion. And, well, it's playing havoc with her short-term memory, it would seem.
If she's asking after me, Dad, then I better come to the hospital. I know it's over 2.5 hours to get back to Seattle, but I can do it, Dad. I mean, if Mum is asking for me, at least I should make an appearance at the hospital, don't you think?
That's not necessary, love. You're in Mount Rainier. You don't need to drive all the way here. I know your mother wouldn't want that if she wasn't in such a confused state of mind, that is. She'd be the very first to say that you should stay exactly where you are and enjoy your camping trip. I'm sure the fresh air and the exercise is doing you the world of good. How long are you staying there for?
Well, it's supposed to be a long weekend. Probably 3 days or possibly 4, depending on how we feel. But it's no train wreck missing a few lectures for both of us. And we can always get notes from Stacy.
Well, don't come all the way back here, love. It would be a complete wasted journey if you ask me. Your mum's going to be absolutely fine. But I will keep you posted as to what the doctors say about her condition. But the main thing is she's going to be right as rain in no time at all. And that's all that matters. It was important for me to keep you posted. I'm only grateful her head injury wasn't worse. I do so wish that Colbert wasn't so rambunctious. Your mother is a petite woman. She's fragile at times. And, well, he can be a formidable giant who's completely unaware of his size.
When Veronica had finished her phone call with her father, she looked at Babs. Look, I don't want to give up on this camping trip. I really don't. But I've had an idea. So hear me out, will you? I'm listening, said Babs. I'm so sorry about your mum, Veronica. The fall sounds pretty nasty. Well, Dad says it could have been worse, and it sounds like she's going to be all right. So it's nothing to fret about. You want to go back to Seattle, don't you? Said Babs, unable to disguise the disappointment in her voice, as they'd only just got here, and the thought of going all the way back to Seattle wasn't at all appealing. Well, not exactly. That wasn't what I was thinking. How about I leave you here, Babs, at the campground, so you continue to relax and enjoy yourself. I'll go home very quickly, visit Mum at the hospital, and I'll come back to you. Do you think you could manage staying here for the next 6 hours or so? But I'll be back, unless you want me to call it quits on this trip. But I think it would be a pity to do that. Don't you? It would be a dreadful pity, Babs agreed candidly. I mean, we've only just got here, haven't we? And I feel so relaxed. I haven't felt this good in ages. So the thought of going back to Seattle is rather daunting, and not a very welcome one exactly. But I understand if you need to go home, and I'm willing to pack up and go home with you and just forget this trip, if that's what we need to do. But if you're willing to continue with this trip, well, I'd be happy to stay here. If you're sure you don't mind driving back home and coming back here again. It's a lot for you to take on. Are you up to it? Absolutely. It'll put my mind at rest to see that my mother's all right. We could extend our time for a few days here. So my trip home and back, well, in the circumstances, it won't really be such a big deal. You really want to go all the way back to Seattle and come back again? Asked Babs. Yes, I do. I know it's an awful amount of travel. Unnecessary travel at that. But I don't want to give up on this camping adventure. I'm beginning to enjoy myself. And I realise I need a break as much as you do. I just think I should look in on my mother. By the sounds of things, she's doing fine, which is a huge relief. I don't know what my father would have done if her injuries had been severe. He says Mum's asking for me. So I think I better just look in on her, don't you? If it puts your mind at rest, you definitely must go, Veronica, and see your mother. I would love to stay here if you don't mind, especially if you're only gone for a few hours. But don't rush back in a hurry. Take all the time you need, even if it means you're only back by tomorrow lunchtime. I appreciate that, Babs. But the main thing is, are you sure you'll be happy to be here alone, especially at night? There are a lot of people out there afraid of camping on their own. Well, the good news, Veronica, is I'm not one of them. I've got bear spray with me, and if I feel insecure, I can go and lock myself up in that big brick building with the toilet facilities and so forth. I'll be fine, don't worry about me. I certainly don't want to travel all the way back to Seattle and come back here again. That would be almost 5 hours on the road, and I couldn't bear that. I just haven't got the stomach to do it. But I'm enjoying myself here, and in truth, I haven't felt this happy in a long time. I really don't mind being on my own. I'll get plenty of sleep while you're away. Let's just say since Russell broke up with me, I haven't been sleeping very well, so I need to make up for lost time. That's why you've got to stay here, Babs. I won't be long, I promise. I just want my mother to know I'm there for her. I'll keep you posted as to what is going on, but we can enjoy the rest of our long weekend together. I'm not giving up on this camping trip for the entire world, let me tell you. Little did Veronica Wilton know, after she hugged her best friend and climbed back into her bright red Jeep, that this would be the last time she'd ever see her friend alive. For it would never have occurred to her that in such a serene, sequestered place, such as the Lakefield camping ground, that something quite dreadful would soon unfold, that she'd never envisage happening in a million months of Sundays. In the years that were to follow, the mysterious mystery of her best friend's enigmatic disappearance would haunt her, bringing her a great deal of grief, and there would be times she would silently curse herself for choosing to go back to Seattle to see her mother, who turned out to be absolutely fine. She couldn't help but feel that had she remained with Babs at the camping ground, that her best friend would be alive and well. What had happened to her? Why had Babs vanished off the face of the earth? How she longed to know the answer to all those questions. Babs did not mind that Veronica had gone back to Seattle at all to see her mother in hospital. Veronica was fiercely close to her mother, and rarely felt she needed to make an appearance at the hospital, given her mother had been asking after her, even though her father assured her that her mother would be fine. Babs knew her friend would be back in a few hours, and at worst by lunchtime the following day. She had told Veronica to take as much time as she needed, for she was perfectly happy being at the campground alone. It meant that she and the indigenous wild animals would share the place together. Babs suddenly became conspicuously aware of the fact that she was utterly exhausted and extremely fatigued. It would seem all the energy had gone to her stomach, to digest the large volume of food she had ingested, that had made her stomach swell up like a little melon, for she had gobbled up her food like a half-starved animal. The sausages she had eaten had gone down favourably, because they had been cooked on an open fire, and they had been absolutely delicious, especially given she hadn't eaten for days. It's amazing how good food can taste when you haven't eaten in a long time, and also when you eat it al fresco. As Babs's father had always said, food cooked in the great outdoors was infinitely superior to food cooked on a stove, and he wasn't wrong about that. When Veronica left the camping ground, it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Babs zipped up the inside of her tent and slipped happily into her cosy sleeping bag, with her slimline torch and cell phone by her side. How glad she was to be able to lie down, and it was so cosy in the tent, but it was beginning to get significantly cooler as the afternoon began to roll towards early evening. The moment she lay down, she was out like a light, for sleep beckoned to her, and its alluring sweetness carried her off happily to the world of her dreams. Since she had come to the camping ground, she hadn't given her ex-boyfriend Russell so much as a passing thought. Veronica had been absolutely right about how a brief stint in the mountains could so effortlessly make you forget about all your troubles. The day had been sensational. The exquisite views over the silvery lake had knocked away the less than fragrant memories of the rather burdensome last few days. Babs didn't see the day finally fade away, like a dying alpine flower on the meadow. The blue sky turned gold, casting its shimmering tangerine glaze over the lake. She didn't see it become black as a raven's feathers, nor did she hear the trills of crickets and frogs serenading the early evening. She didn't hear the footsteps as someone set up a tent not too far away from where she and Veronica had pitched theirs. But she was abruptly awoken to a man's voice calling out, "Hello! Hello! Hello there! Is anyone at home?" And with that she heard a slapping sound on her tent, which made Babs suddenly aware that someone was out there, and this revelation made her feel both vulnerable and extremely uncertain. What the hell, she thought. Who had rudely thrust her out of her sleep? It had been a man's voice. It felt as if she'd been flung forward in the windscreen of her car in a head-on collision. Babs had been momentarily disorientated, somewhat confused perhaps, as she mentally tried to find her bearings. She briefly glanced around her in the darkness and realized she was in the tent at the Lakefield camping ground. So who was the stranger? It suddenly dawned on Babs that Veronica had told her that her Uncle Chris Wilton said that there was another couple that was expected to be camping at the Lakefield camping ground that evening. Maybe they had arrived here later than scheduled and set up camp, and she had not been aware of their presence, for she had been out for the count, catching up on some much-needed lost sleep. It was dark in the tent, but she fumbled around awkwardly for her slimline torch and for the bear spray, and she scrambled over to the zipper of the tent, pulling it open. She peered out of the opening to view the owner of the voice. It was dark out there, but with the light of the torch she saw the man very clearly. He was young and handsome, and she suddenly became very conscious of how dishevelled she looked. She tried to straighten her hair, and managed a shy, very demure smile. She did not feel threatened by the man. He looked to be a decent sort of fellow. Besides, he was probably here with his wife in the tent that they had recently erected. "Oh, hello," she said. "You gave me quite the shock. You must excuse me, but I've woken up from a deep sleep. I had no idea anyone else was camping here." "I'm very sorry, to tell you the truth. I was surprised to see a tent pitched by the lake, and no sign of a car anywhere. I wondered if anyone was actually around, and if the tent had somewhat been abandoned. I wouldn't have shouted so loudly if I thought someone was actually in the tent. I genuinely thought it was empty. I'm sorry to have so rudely woken you up." "Oh, don't worry about that. You just gave me a start, that's all. I'm camping here with my friend Veronica Wilton. Her Uncle Chris Wilton owns this campground, you see. She'll be here any minute. She just went off to get something." Babs had said this to make the man aware she wasn't here alone, although he didn't look like a threat at all. But then it didn't do any harm to make it appear that her friend would be around very shortly. The young man, she guessed, was approximately about 23 years old. He was extremely attractive, very good-looking. But Babs was not remotely interested in any men at the moment. She was still brooding over her relationship with Russell, and hoping with all her heart that they would soon get back together. "Is your wife in the tent with you?" she asked gingerly, expecting to see a young woman ferreting around the tent that had been positioned annoyingly close to theirs. What on earth was wrong with people? They had this whole campground to themselves, and this couple had the audacity to camp at such close quarters to their tent. She could see the man's fire pit was smoking, and she quickly picked up the delicious aromatic smell of barbecue meat on the wind. The smell made her suddenly feel very hungry again. "No, I'm not married, I'm afraid," said the young man, almost regretfully. "I'm not with anyone on this trip. I broke up with my girlfriend only a couple of days ago. She'd have joined me on this trip if things hadn't turned so sour. We've always enjoyed camping together as a couple,
but I decided, what the hell? Why not come here on my own regardless? Camping on your own can be a great deal of fun. It's good to get out in nature. You should have seen the animals earlier on this evening, gathering around the lake for a drink. It was a sight to behold, let me tell you.
Oh, I'm sorry I missed that, said Babs. I must have slept through it all.
Well, don't miss out on it tomorrow, that's what I say. Incidentally, if you're interested, I've got lots of food on the grill. Why don't you join me? It's not fun eating on your own, you know. Oh, by the way, my name is Max McKeith.
Babs found her stomach was now beginning to rumble. She had eaten so much earlier on, but her appetite had come crashing back. It was tempting to accept this nice gentleman's offer, but should she? Was it a wise thing for her to do, given she was all alone on this campground? She didn't know this man from a bar of soap, but there wasn't anything about him that made her think she had anything to worry about, or that he was less than a gentleman. And the smell of that barbecue was utterly irresistible. What harm would it do to join him for a spot to eat? He was probably looking for some light-hearted conversation and good company, and there was no way he'd make any romantic overtures towards her. He didn't look the type. No, it would be fun to eat dinner with him. He seemed like a nice enough man. My name's Babs, she said. Babs Roxburgh. My friend's name is Veronica Wilton.
Well, Veronica can join us for a bite to eat when she returns. I'm sure she would like to do so. She'd be most welcome.
Well, she'll be gone for a short while, so I doubt she'll join us. But I would be glad to accept your invitation. I'm quite hungry, actually, and I must admit your barbecue smells absolutely amazing. It certainly saves me the trouble of starting up a fire on my own.
Well, there you go. There's plenty of food going spare. I've cooked the most delicious spatchcock chicken, with peri-peri. Do you like peri-peri? You look like the kind of girl that enjoys spices.
Well, I don't know what that means, but I do like my spices, said Babs. I always enjoy heat in my food.
Good, it's a deal then, said the young man. I'll give you time to get refreshed, given I've only just woken you up from your sleep. I'll see you in a jiffy.
His face broke out into a warm smile.
Come exactly as you are.
Babs had absolutely no intention of joining the handsome stranger who called himself Max McKeith in the crumpled clothes that she was wearing. She would at the very least make a small effort to look halfway decent and respectable. She straightened herself out, slipping into a comfortable pair of jeans and sneakers. She ran a brush through her long, wispy blonde hair. She still looked a sorry sight, with dark crescent moons under her eyes, but the mountain air had brought a rosy glow to her cheeks, and was at long last ironing away the vacant look she had worn on her face for many days. It was with the guidance of her slim torchlight that she made her way to Max's tent. She decided to leave her cell phone behind, as she was sure that Veronica wouldn't be needing to get in touch with her for quite a while. Max was sitting comfortably on a camping chair. He had 2 other camping chairs erected around the fire pit, and courteously rose to his feet when Babs made her appearance.
Good, I'm so glad you decided to come,
he said, greeting her with a warm smile, and beckoning for her to take a seat, which she did so gratefully. She was now very glad she had decided to join Max for dinner. He seemed friendly, and it was good to have company.
Please make yourself comfortable. Would you like a beer? He said, pointing to the cooler. I'm having one for sure.
No, thanks. I don't drink. But do you have something non-alcoholic, perhaps?
I sure do. I've got quite a lot of Coke here. Would you like one?
He said, pulling a can out of the icebox and presenting it to Babs, who eagerly took it. Coke would be lovely, she said, pulling back the ring pull and taking a grateful sip. She stared happily into the crackling flames of the fire and suddenly felt quite alive, swaddled by the dark night, as she listened contentedly to the background chorus of crickets and frogs, and glanced up at a velvety sky bejewelled with so many spectacular stars, far too many to count. Babs had found Max easy to talk to, and before long she was enjoying their casual, light-hearted conversation. She couldn't believe she had been reluctant to join him, as she could see his intentions towards her were completely honourable. She was surprised that he was also from Seattle and was studying engineering at university. Max was quite debonair, extremely handsome, and there was something about him that was quite charming and drew you right in. She was sure he had this magnetizing effect on all women, for he looked like he had possibly broken many women's hearts. Babs noticed that his loose, slightly curly dark hair, that was tousled wildly around his face, gave him that carefree, almost surfer boy kind of look. His eyes were as green as emeralds. She'd never seen eyes that green before, and they were the kind of eyes you could get lost in if you weren't careful. His honey-coloured skin spoke of a man that welcomed spending a lot of time in the great outdoors, and so Babs suspected he was probably a frequent visitor to the Lakefield camping ground, as there was so much to do here. Max was wearing a pair of longish khaki-coloured shorts, a green-coloured golfing shirt that seemed to bring out the green colour of his eyes, and a pair of walking boots. Max encouraged Babs to tuck in, and before long she was helping herself to platefuls of spatchcock chicken, served with baked potatoes, garlic bread and salad. The food was delicious, and she eagerly washed it down with some Coca-Cola, as she didn't fancy drinking alcohol. But she couldn't help but notice that Max was drinking down one beer after another, rather too quickly. If he carried on drinking like this, surely he'd get incredibly drunk, and that thought was a slight concern for her. She didn't fancy hanging around with a drunk person, but Max looked as if he could hold his own when it came to his drink. So there we are, that is the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.